All right, let's dive right into this explainer, because we're about to unravel one of the absolute most fascinating historical investigations you will ever come across. We're looking at a story that completely blends ancient myths, missing kingdoms, and modern genetics into a centuries-old detective case. Today, we're going to explore the incredible legend of Queen Heo Hwang-ok. And by walking through the evidence and the data we've gathered together, we're going to try and separate the historical facts from the absolute fiction.
So 6 million. I want you to just let that massive number sink in for a second. That represents the number of modern-day Koreans who trace their direct lineage back to a single legendary queen from the year 4880. Basically, if you belong to the Gimhae Kim, Gimhae Ho, or Incheon E clans, your genealogical records literally say you're a direct descendant of Queen Ho and her 12 children, which is honestly just an astonishing legacy for someone whose very existence is highly debated by historians today.
Okay, part 1, The Legend of Queen Heo.
According to a 13th century chronicle called the Songguk Yusa, her story reads kind of like a cinematic masterpiece. Imagine this, she's a 16-year-old princess from this distant, mysterious kingdom called Ayodhya. The legend tells us that the heavenly lord appeared to her parents in a dream right on day one, telling them to send her away to King Suro of Gaya, who basically hadn't found a queen yet. So she supposedly sets off, sailing for 2 straight months, guided by a striking red sail and a red flag. And on the way, she even supposedly finds a mythical Biondo peach, a magical fruit that only appears once every 3,000 years.
Now, as you'd expect, she didn't exactly show up empty-handed. She brought an unbelievable dowry loaded with gold, silver, jewels, beautiful silk, and exquisite tableware. But honestly, the wildest item on this list? A literal stone pagoda. The legend claims she brought it aboard her ship specifically to calm the ocean god and guarantee a safe trip. And what's crazy is that today, you can actually go see a rough, unusually shaped stone pagoda near her tomb in Gimhae, South Korea, which for some people makes this ancient tale feel completely real.
Moving right along to part 2, The Mystery of Ayodhya.
So if this princess really did sail to Korea, we've got to ask, where on earth was Ayodhya? Ancient records just broadly call it a distant country, so scholars are kind of all over the map here. A really popular theory is Ayodhya in northern India because it sounds similar, right? But critics are quick to point out it's way too far inland for a major sea voyage. Then you've got the I Kingdom in southern India, great coastal access, but that theory actually comes from a heavily criticized 1968 pseudo-history book. What about Ayodhya in Thailand? Sounds similar again, but that kingdom wasn't even founded in 1350, which is centuries after the fact. Lately, scholars are leaning towards a translation meaning the Western region, pointing to somewhere in Central Asia, like Tibet or an Uyghur nation. Oh, and a quick heads up, if you've been reading about this recently, you might have seen her referred to as Princess Suriratna. It's a gorgeous name, but as historical detectives, we absolutely need to note that this is a completely modern invention. It was literally coined for a 2015 comic book by translating her actual Korean name Hwang-ok, which means yellow jade, into Hindi. So, lovely name for sure, but you will not find it anywhere in the ancient Songguk Yusa text. All right, part 3, the historical record. So what exactly happens when we put this beautiful legend under a historical microscope? Well, we find a massive contradiction between our primary ancient texts. On one hand, we have the Songguk Yusa from the 13th century, which gives us all these vivid details, but it was written by a Buddhist monk named Ilyan, who was definitely known to exaggerate tales to, hype up Buddhism. On the other hand, we have the Samguk Sagi from the 12th century. It's older, it's widely considered much more historically accurate, and guess what? It completely omits any mention of an Indian princess arriving in Korea. 0. And to really grasp why historians are so skeptical of the Samguk Yusa, just look at this number, 157. Yep, that is the completely absurd age King Suro supposedly lived to. Remember, the exact same source that tells us about Queen Heo also tells us that the king magically transformed into hawks and eagles to fight his rivals. I mean, when your main historical source reads like a high fantasy novel, it's pretty tough to take the geographic origins of its characters as literal hard facts. And this points to a pretty well-known pattern. Our author, Ilyan, actually had a habit of completely fabricating foreign heritage to make local rulers seem way more exotic and divinely chosen. He literally did the same thing with another historical figure, Lady Saso, mislabeling her as Chinese. Think about it. Marrying a princess from India, the literal birthplace of Buddhism, would have been the ultimate PR move for a Korean king. It's highly likely the whole story was dramatized just for political and religious clout.
Which brings us to part 4,
archaeology and DNA clues.
But hold on, what about the physical stuff? The artifacts, the tombs? For years, people pointed to a carving of twin fish on Queen Heo's tomb gate as solid proof of her Indian origins. But then, a 2018 excavation by Hanyang University researchers completely blew that wide open. They traced this exact twin fish motif all the way back to ancient Babylonian. It turns out this wasn't some exclusive Indian symbol. It was just a super widespread ancient Asian ritual symbol used to bring marital happiness, popping up from present-day Iraq all the way over to Japan. So definitely not proof of a direct link to India. Okay, but what about the DNA? This is where it gets crazy. Back in 2004, researchers analyzed remains from the royal tombs, and they found something called haplogroup M. Now, this specific DNA group is super rare in modern Koreans. We're talking only about 5% of the population, but it is much more common over in South Asia. So at the time, researchers were understandably thrilled. They announced, wow, this might actually validate the myth of the foreign princess.
But wait, fast forward to 2022, and genetic science has leveled up incredibly, giving us this massive plot twist. Researchers took a much closer look and realized this wasn't just any generic haplogroup M. It was a very specific branch known as M7A. And M7A is directly linked to the ancient Geumgwan people. These were the native inhabitants who lived right there on the Korean peninsula long before other populations eventually displaced them. So that supposedly foreign DNA, it actually belonged to ancient native royalty the whole time.
We can actually hear this directly from the lead genetic researcher on the project, Jung Song-won, who noted that studies from Cambridge and UNIST linked this Jomon-related DNA directly to remains found in the Devil's Gate cave up in the Russian Far East. As he points out, these ancient cave people are incredibly close relatives to the early native inhabitants of the Korean peninsula. It completely reframes the narrative we were working with.
And when you start looking closely, all the little details of the myth, they start fitting perfectly with native regional history instead of some epic voyage from India. I mean, the Devil's Gate cave is right in the ancient territory of the Goguryeo kingdom. The myth says her boat darted like an arrow with striking red sails and flags. Well, guess what perfectly mimics Goguryeo naval vessels and military colors? Arrow-like boats and red flags. Even the name of her courtier, Sinpo, happens to be the name of a real city right on the eastern coast of present-day North Korea. All the evidence heavily points to Queen Heo being a powerful native northern figure whose real story was just mythologized over the centuries.
Finally, Part 5, a lasting cultural legacy. Look, even if the absolute latest science and textual analysis scream that she was a native Korean ruler whose story got a huge, dramatic rewrite by a 13th century monk, her modern impact is just absolutely undeniable. This myth has completely transcended historical fact to become this huge tool for cultural friendship. Back in 2001, a massive memorial was set up in Ayodhya, India. Then in 2018, South Korea's First Lady actually went there for a Diwali celebration to lay the foundation to expand it. By 2019, India and South Korea were literally printing joint postage stamps to honor her. And her legend is even going to be featured in a 2026 Netflix film. Hundreds of South Koreans travel to Ayodhya every single year to pay homage to what is, effectively, a shared mythological history.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. We've seen the totally contradictory ancient texts. We've seen the DNA twist, pointing back to ancient native populations rather than across the ocean to India. But honestly, when a single story has the immense power to actively unite 6 million modern descendants and foster genuine, real-world goodwill between two major nations today, does it really even matter if it started out as a myth? It's just an unbelievable testament to the power of shared storytelling. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the history you think you know.